The rain had turned the parking lot outside Willow Creek Grill into a shallow, shimmering lake when Lila stepped away from her father. Her voice carried farther than she intended as she hissed, "I cannot keep doing this, Dad. You are confusing everyone, and people think I am neglecting you." Silas Merrick, 68 years old, stood beneath the dim yellow light, his worn denim jacket plastered to his shoulders, the cuffs dark with water. His hand trembled slightly around the handle of his old walking stick, though his eyes stayed steady on his daughter. Silas had spent a lifetime in small towns and fields, working as a mechanic on the edge of Maple Glen, an American Midwestern town where the wind carried the smell of cornfields and gasoline. Locals knew him as the man who never missed a shift, the one who patched neighbors' fences and changed their tires on winter mornings. He had raised Lila alone after his wife's illness took Ruth away, had sat through every spelling bee, science fair, and graduation. His life narrowed to one purpose: give Lila what he never had. Now Lila stood beside her husband, Connor Hale, whose hand rested on the fob of a sleek black SUV. Connor checked his watch, impatient, then addressed Silas as if he were speaking to a confused stranger. "Your room is at Maple Crest, Silas. That is your home now. We talked about this. The doctors said you need to be somewhere safe. We have a lot going on with the house sale and everything." Silas blinked rain from his lashes. "The house is paid for," he replied, voice soft yet clear. "That is my home. You told me I would still have a say." Lila glanced around, embarrassment flushing her face as diners leaving the restaurant slowed to listen. "Dad, please," she muttered, her tone suddenly bright and brittle. "You are getting confused again, and it makes people uncomfortable. You signed the papers, remember? You gave me power of attorney. This is what is best." Her words hung in the wet night. Silas felt humiliation burn hotter than the rain that slid down his neck. He remembered reading the documents at the kitchen table, Lila's hand resting over his as she told him it would make things easier if anything happened. He remembered trusting her completely. A restaurant hostess hovered near the doorway, watching. An older couple paused beside their car. One man shook his head, pity in his eyes, as if the scene were already decided. An aging father lost to his own confusion, rescued by a dutiful child. Lila stepped back toward the SUV. "Get in, Dad," she said, forcing a smile. "We will drop you at Maple Crest. They will help you get settled again." Silas did not move. Under the flickering light, the deep lines at the corners of his eyes tightened with a different kind of resolve. "I remember every word I signed," he replied quietly. "I also remember the price of that house and every dollar I spent to keep you safe in it." Connor's jaw tightened. Rain tapped a heavier rhythm on the car roof. Lila sighed loudly, opened the door, and slid inside, leaving Silas standing alone as the SUV's engine started. The vehicle rolled away, tires sending up thin sheets of water, and Silas remained in the glow of the restaurant sign, jacket heavy, walking stick planted firm on the asphalt. The empty passenger seat beside the driver, where he had once sat proudly after family dinners, passed him by like an accusation. As the taillights vanished into the wet darkness, Silas turned his gaze from the road to the reflection of himself in the restaurant window, an elderly man left behind as if he were a burden. Something in his eyes, however, held steady and unbroken. The hostess stepped closer, uncertain whether to speak. Silas lifted his jacket collar and gave her a small, reassuring nod that belonged more to a younger man who still believed the world could be put right with enough patience. Then he whispered to himself, almost inaudible beneath the rain, "I am not confused, Lila. Not anymore." He tightened his grip on the walking stick and started towards Maple Crest, his retirement community on the far side of town, each step deliberate. Somewhere between the restaurant and the quiet hallway where his empty chair waited, a decision had already begun to form. The question that followed him down the slick pavement was not whether his daughter had betrayed him. The question was how a father who had given everything would answer such a betrayal without losing himself. Silas kept the jacket even when the elbows began to shine and the seams along the cuffs loosened. It had been a gift from Ruth on his 35th birthday, bought with money she secretly saved from sewing alterations in the evenings. Every stain and frayed thread mapped out years of labor at Merrick Auto, cold mornings under raised bonnets, and long walks home through Maple Glen streets. Decades earlier, That same jacket had hung over the back of a rocking chair in a tiny nursery where pale yellow walls reflected the glow of a single lamp. Ruth leaned against him, one hand resting on her pregnant belly as they listened to the rain outside their first small house. Silas remembered promising quietly, "Whatever happens, this child will never feel alone." Ruth smiled and squeezed his fingers. Her illness would come later, slow and cruel. In that moment she was still strong, her laughter bright as she joked that the baby would probably prefer a newer father, one who did not smell like engine oil and coffee. Years unspooled from that night. Silas took extra shifts, fixed tractors on nearby farms, repaired neighbors' broken fences without sending a bill. He fixed his own fence every spring too, fighting against wind and time as the boards leaned and cracks appeared. The fence never stayed perfect, yet it bordered the little house where Lila grew up, a simple white frame in a quiet street of maples and tired porches. Present-day Maple Crest held none of that familiar comfort. The retirement community hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and reheated vegetables. An empty chair faced Silas's window, positioned so that whenever he sat on his narrow bed, he saw not the field outside, but the absence of anyone sitting opposite him. That evening, after walking back from Willow Creek Grill, his socks damp in his shoes, he hung the worn jacket carefully on the back of that empty chair. The gesture turned the chair into something else, almost a stand-in for the life that had once filled his house. A soft knock sounded at the door. Jordan, a young care aide with a mop of dark curls, peered in. "You came back on your own, Mr. Merrick?" Lila called and said you got upset at dinner. Silas's lips pressed into a thin line. Upset. The words sat between them like a verdict that someone else had written. "I walked," he replied. "It is not far." Jordan frowned slightly. "It is at least 1.5 miles, sir, and the rain is heavy tonight." Silas lowered himself onto the bed and rested both hands on the top of his walking stick. "That used to be the distance from my house to the garage," he said. "I walked it 3 times a day for 30 years. People called that dedication." Jordan studied him. "Lila said your memory has been worse this year." She mentioned the doctor's report. Silas felt the first flicker of something sharp beneath his calm. "My memory is tired," he answered, "not gone." He nodded toward the small dresser. "In the top drawer there is a folder. I would like you to see something." Jordan crossed the room and pulled open the drawer. Inside lay a neat stack of papers bound by a paperclip: insurance records, mortgage documents, bank receipts. On top sat a photocopy of the power of attorney paperwork with Lila's signature beside his own. "She brought these to me 2 years ago," Silas explained. "She said it would help with hospital forms. She said it was only in case something happened." Jordan scanned the pages, brow furrowing. "This grants her wide control of your financial decisions," he murmured. "Did anyone else talk you through this?" "No," Silas replied. "I trusted her. I always trusted her." His mind drifted back to the yellow nursery, to the nights he fell asleep in the rocking chair with Lila on his chest, while Ruth coughed quietly in the next room. He remembered counting tips from the petrol station, telling himself that every dollar would someday turn into tuition, into a safe car, into the down payment on Lila's first flat. "You know," he said softly, "when Ruth died, Lila was 12. She looked at me and asked if we were going to lose the house. I promised her we would not. I promised she would never have to worry about where she slept." Jordan set the papers down carefully. "Maybe Lila is overwhelmed," he offered, though uncertainty colored his tone. "People make strange choices when they feel pressure." Silas studied the younger man's face. "You think she might be taking advantage," he said, not as a question, but as a quiet observation. Jordan hesitated, then sat on the chair opposite the bed, the jacket hanging between them like a curtain of history. "I think you deserve to be certain about what is happening," he replied. "There is a social worker who visits this floor on Thursdays. She can explain what these documents mean in practice. Perhaps you could talk to her." A small turning point settled into the room. Silas had been drifting from day to day, accepting the story that age made him helpless. Now he had a new line of thought. If he gathered the facts, he would know where he truly stood. Outside his window, the Maple Glen sky darkened fully. The broken fence around his old house returned to his thoughts, boards split by seasons of storm and heat. He had always fixed it slowly, one plank at a time, never shouting at the weather. The betrayal that seemed to encircle him now might need the same approach. One step at a time. Quiet, patient, precise. Jordan stood to leave. I can ask the social worker to stop by your room, he said. Would that be all right? Silas gave a slow nod. Yes, I would like that. As the door closed, he looked at the jacket on the empty chair and imagined it hanging over his old kitchen chair back on Willow Lane. He could almost hear his daughter's teenage voice, laughing as she asked about carburetors and university brochures in the same breath. Trust did not vanish in a single moment. It frayed slowly, like fabric rubbed thin over the years, until one day a tear appeared that could no longer be ignored. Sleep pulled at his eyes, yet his thoughts stayed sharp, tracing the edges of documents, dates and signatures. Somewhere in the mess of papers and memories, the path to understanding lay hidden. The hook that kept his mind awake was simple. If Lila had taken control of everything, why did he still feel that something important remained in his hands alone? Morning light seeped through the thin curtains at Maple Crest, turning the room a pale gold. Silas sat at the small table beneath the window, a notebook open before him. The pages carried dates, phrases, and names written in a careful, practiced hand. He wrote, House paid off, 2012. Power of attorney signed, May 2023. Maple Crest move, January 2025. House sale mentioned, April 2025. No papers shown. The act of writing steadied him. His father had once said that if something mattered, it belonged on paper. That principle had guided Silas throughout the years. He kept meticulous records for Merrick Auto. Memory drew him back to a quiet Sunday morning in his old kitchen. Steam rose from chipped mugs as he and Lila sat across from each other, the scent of Ruth's favorite cinnamon blend still clinging to the cupboards years after her passing. Lila had been 22 then, home from college with a head full of plans and a laptop covered in stickers. She announced that she wanted to move to a larger city, maybe Chicago or Denver, somewhere with more opportunity. You should go, Silas told her, hands wrapped around his mug. You have the grades. You have the drive. I will manage the house. Her eyes softened. Come with me then, she replied, though her tone suggested she already expected him to decline. You could sell the garage and retire somewhere quieter. Silas shook his head. This town still needs a good mechanic, he answered. Besides, someone has to keep an eye on that broken fence. It falls every time the wind changes. They both laughed. The fence had become a family joke, a symbol of the constant small battles of home ownership. He promised Lila that day that the house would always be waiting if the city ever felt too big or too cold. Years later, such promises stood in stark contrast to the reality of Maple Crest. The social worker, Mrs. Danner, arrived just before noon. She was a calm woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back into a low bun and a clipboard tucked under her arm. I understand you have some questions about your documents, she said, taking the seat opposite him. Jordan hovered near the doorway, as if ready to step in if needed. Silas slid the folder across the table. I want to know exactly what I signed, he said. Not what anyone says it means. What it truly allows. She read in silence for several minutes. Her eyes moved steadily across lines of legal text and handwritten annotations. When she finally looked up, her expression held a quiet gravity. This form grants your daughter authority over your financial accounts, property decisions, and medical choices if you are deemed unable to manage them, she explained. The wording here is quite broad. A physician's note of cognitive decline can activate it. Have you seen such a note? Silas shook his head slowly. No. Lila mentioned that the doctor said my memory was slipping, yet no one showed me anything official. Mrs. Danner flipped to a second page. There is a reference here to your primary care physician, she said. Consent for information sharing was signed. I can request copies of your recent evaluations if you give permission. Permission was granted with a steady nod. A small surge of control returned to Silas's chest. That afternoon, Jordan returned with a file from the clinic. The cognitive assessment inside described mild forgetfulness consistent with age, yet concluded that Silas remained capable of managing his affairs. No formal recommendation for guardianship or full control existed. The contradiction cut through the narrative Lila had woven. If the medical report did not declare him incompetent, why had she insisted he could not stay in his own home or manage his own account? Suspicion moved from a painful whisper to a coherent pattern. Silas turned to the next question that mattered, the house. Is there any way to see the record of the sale? He asked. The deed transfer, the sale price, whose name is listed. Mrs. Danner nodded thoughtfully. County records are public, she replied. A staff computer in the office can access the property database. I can help you check. Later that day, they sat side by side at a desk near the nurse's station, the glow of a computer screen bright against the dusk pressing at the windows. Maple Glen's property records site loaded slowly, as if reluctant to reveal what lay within. Silas spelled out his address on Willow Lane. The record appeared. The property had been transferred from Silas J. Merrick to Lila Merrick Hale 6 months after he signed the power of attorney. The sale had occurred 3 months later to an investment company specializing in rental conversions. The listed price set noticeably below current market value. There should have been a discussion, Silas murmured. His voice carried no anger, only deep disappointment. I was in that house every day at that time. She told me the papers were maintenance contracts. Mrs. Danner's lips pressed into a thin line. This may fall under financial exploitation, she said, particularly if you did not fully understand or consent to the transfer. The phrase financial exploitation settled in his chest like a stone. It gave name to the unease he had felt outside Willow Creek Grill when Lila spoke, as though his confusion justified every choice she had made. Jordan, who had drifted closer as they read, clenched his jaw. Someone ought to hold her accountable, he muttered. Silas looked at the young man. That is not my aim, he replied gently. My aim is to stand on solid ground again. If consequences follow, they will do so on their own feet. Strength returned to his posture, subtle yet unmistakable. He asked for printed copies of the property record and the cognitive assessment, then slid them into his folder alongside the power of attorney. Each document felt like one more plank in the fence he was rebuilding around his dignity. As he walked back to his room, he passed a television in the common area broadcasting a local news report. A picture of Willow Lane flashed briefly on the screen in a segment about increasing property acquisitions by outside investors. Lila's decision had not simply affected him. It had contributed to a slow erosion of the community he loved. His daughter's voice from the past echoed in his ears. I will always take care of you, Dad. You do not have to worry about anything once I am handling things. Trust had once made those words feel like shelter. Knowledge now turned them into something else entirely. That night, Silas sat opposite the empty chair, jacket still draped over its back, and studied the folder on the table between them. Patience had carried him through grief, through years of long shifts and lonely dinners. That same patience would now guide the next steps. An idea began to form, not of revenge, but of quiet correction. Someone in town still remembered him as the man who fixed things. There might be someone who could help him repair this, too. The unanswered question that closed the day was simple yet powerful. In a town where everyone knew everyone's business, how long could Lila's version of the story stand once the truth began to surface? Silas woke before most of Maple Crest stirred. The corridor outside his room was silent except for the hum of the ceiling vent that always rattled at dawn. He sat on the edge of the bed, steadying his breath as sunlight crept across the floor, tracing a faint path toward the worn jacket on the chair. That jacket had become an anchor during these weeks, an object that reminded him of every promise he once made to his family and every promise he still intended to keep to himself. He slid the folder of documents into an old canvas satchel. The satchel had belonged to Ruth, embroidered with tiny blue threads she stitched during quiet evenings when Lila was small. A corner of the embroidery had frayed, and Silas smoothed it instinctively. The simple action returned him to a morning long ago when Ruth sat by the kitchen window, patching the same bag, because Lila had dragged it through the garden. Silas had watched them both, heart full, and marveled at how something so fragile and ordinary could carry so much of their life. He left his room and walked through the courtyard toward the gate at the front of Maple Crest. Jordan had placed his name on the visitor sign-in sheet the previous night, allowing him to exit without an escort. Staff believed he was visiting a friend across town. The truth carried more weight than that small explanation. He intended to seek clarity from someone who knew more about property, someone outside the circle that Lila had managed to weave around him. The short walk from Maple Crest to the edge of town brought back dozens of memories. Houses he once repaired bicycles for. Driveways where he sealed cracks before winter. A small apple tree he planted near the schoolyard with Lila when she was 6. He paused near it, noticing the trunk's roughened bark and the widening branches. A faint breeze shifted the leaves, revealing several apples beginning to redden. Growth continued with no audience, no applause, simply because it had the strength to do so. The thought settled inside him, quiet and grounding. Soon he reached the old hardware store on Claremont Street. Its sign, Weatherly's Tools and Timber, had faded to a soft rust color. Inside, rows of shelving stood full of bolts, brushes, garden spades, and planks that smelled of pine sap. A familiar figure at the back counter raised his head and squinted through thick glasses as Silas approached. "Is that you, Merrick?" the man asked. His voice carried the weight of years spent outdoors. "I heard you moved out of Willow Lane. Someone mentioned a sale." "That is what I need to talk about," Silas replied, resting his walking stick against the counter. "Do you have a moment, Hartley?" Hartley Weatherly had owned the hardware store since before Lila was born. He possessed a straightforward honesty that never drifted into cruelty. Whoever walked into his shop left with either advice or a task he had insisted they complete properly. Many residents had become accustomed to his gruff kindness. The deep lines across his brow softened as he gestured toward the small table in the corner, usually reserved for coffee breaks. "Sit down before you fall down," Hartley muttered, although concern flickered behind his words. "I always said you worked too many hours at that garage." Silas took a seat and extracted the folder from the satchel. Coffee aroma filled the space, mixed with the dusty scent of tools. A memory surfaced of afternoons when he brought Lila to the store, letting her choose a small packet of nails or a paintbrush for her school projects. She always looked up to Hartley with a mix of curiosity and awe. "I need your help," Silas said. "I do not understand everything about property law. I only know that something about the sale of my house feels wrong." He slid the printed documents across the table. Hartley pushed his glasses higher on his nose and began reading. His expression shifted gradually from puzzlement to disapproval, then to something harsher. He set the papers down with deliberate care. "This shows the house was transferred to your daughter before it was sold," Hartley said slowly, "and sold below market value to a company that has been buying half the street. You are telling me you agreed to lose ownership like that?" "I trusted her," Silas answered. "She told me the forms were routine documents. She said she was helping sort hospital paperwork. She never mentioned transferring the house." Hartley tapped the page with a calloused finger. This might have been legal based on the signature, yet legality does not always equal integrity. "Did you know the sale price before today?" "No." Hartley leaned back, folding his arms. "I have seen situations like this before in neighboring towns. Elderly parents sign power of attorney, thinking it helps with medical decisions, and the family member takes control of everything. Sometimes out of desperation, sometimes out of entitlement, sometimes because they convince themselves they deserve it." A moment passed in which only the ticking of the store's wall clock could be heard. Silas felt a tightening across his chest, though not the crushing despair he had feared. A different sensation formed instead, something steadier. Betrayal came in shapes he never imagined, yet truth had its own strange, steadying clarity. "Hartley," Silas said, "someone told me there are ways to review these transactions formally, perhaps through a complaint or a legal inquiry." "There are," Hartley replied. "The county's Elder Protection Office handles concerns like this. They investigate whether the terms were fair, whether the person signing understood what they were doing. It might not reverse the sale, though it can prompt further action." Silas lowered his gaze to the folder. The papers no longer felt like accusations. They felt like puzzle pieces he could arrange with patience. His strength did not lie in anger, but in calm persistence. "Would you consider accompanying me?" Silas asked. "I would value a witness who knows how long my family lived on Willow Lane." Hartley's eyebrows rose. "You want to show them these papers with me in the room?" "If you are willing," Silas replied. "You understand this town better than most. Your voice might help them see the full picture." Hartley studied him for several seconds before nodding once. "I will go. You are a good man, Merrick. You patched half the broken fences in this town without charging anyone. I will not let you walk into an office alone with only a stack of confusing documents." The relief that washed through Silas felt gentle rather than overwhelming. He understood that asking for help required humility, not weakness. The decision to involve Hartley marked another quiet step forward. A woman entered the store at that moment, calling to Hartley about a new shipment of screws. Her tone was impatient and loud enough to echo. Hartley stood and excused himself, returning to his usual brisk manner. The woman continued talking, explaining that she needed the screws because she and her husband were renovating a rental property on Willow Lane. Pride colored her voice as she boasted about purchasing several homes cheaply before prices rose. Silas listened without interrupting. The mention of Willow Lane tightened something inside him. His house had become part of someone's portfolio, stripped of memory and sold as an asset. The thought created a sharp ache, though he concealed it beneath controlled breathing. When the woman left, Hartley returned to the table and muttered, "Lila sold your house to the same company this woman works with. They are turning the lane into rental lots faster than anyone can protest." The community board tried to slow it down, though investors always seemed to find a way around local objections. The information sharpened the stakes. Silas realized his daughter's choices extended beyond family matters. They rippled through the community that once embraced them. He felt a deeper sadness for that reason, not only because of personal loss, but because the street that held his life's work had become a commodity. "We will go to the county office this week," Hartley said. "You should rest until then. Do not tell your daughter yet. Let us see what the officials say first." Silas gathered his papers and stood. A faint stiffness ran up his spine, though his steps remained deliberate. He left the store and began the walk back toward Maple Crest. The sky above Maple Glen carried thin, trailing clouds that allowed sunlight to filter through in soft patches. As he passed the old schoolyard, he paused again by the apple tree. A single apple had fallen during the time he spent in the shop. It rested in the grass, slightly bruised yet intact. He picked it up, turning it in his hand. The apple reminded him of the fence he repaired every year, the way time weathered wood and fruit alike. Care was what kept things alive. Neglect, or misused authority, led to decay. On his way toward the retirement community gate, a figure approached from the opposite direction. It was Marianne Keller, a neighbor from Willow Lane. She carried a bag of groceries and adjusted her sunglasses as she recognized him. "Silas? I thought you were staying at the house. The street feels different without you there." "I am at Maple Crest now," he replied. Marian hesitated. "I saw the moving van the day the new owners came by. I thought you had chosen to downsize." Silas weighed his answer carefully. "It was not entirely my decision." A troubled expression crossed her face, though she respected his privacy enough not to pry. "If you ever need anything, I still live 2 doors down. You helped me install that porch light years ago. I have not forgotten." "I appreciate that," he said. The interaction strengthened a thought that had formed earlier. The people who remembered him had not vanished. Support did not always arrive in dramatic forms. Sometimes it appeared through a neighbor with groceries, a hardware store owner with uncompromising integrity, or a care aide who believed in second opinions. Back in his room, he placed the papers on the table beside the empty chair. The jacket remained draped across it, the same as always. The chair no longer felt like a symbol of absence. It felt like a place where he could imagine someone trustworthy sitting beside him, helping to sort truth from manipulation. The day ended with one question lingering in the quiet room. If the county recognized irregularities in the transfer of the house, what would Lila's reaction reveal about the person she had become, and what would it reveal about the part of her that still remembered the father who carried her across a field during her first storm? The morning chosen for the visit to the county office arrived cold enough to mist the windows of Maple Crest. Silas dressed with deliberate care, selecting a clean shirt and the jacket Ruth once embroidered inside the collar with a tiny stitched leaf. The embroidered shape had long ago faded into the fabric, yet he felt it each time he buttoned the jacket. A quiet strength traveled through him as he slipped the satchel strap over his shoulder. He met Hartley outside the hardware store shortly after 8. Hartley wore his usual flannel shirt and carried a thermos of coffee in one hand. His expression was a mixture of determination and concern. People in Maple Glen rarely became involved in personal conflicts unless they felt a moral tug. Hartley's presence beside Silas revealed how firmly he believed something had gone wrong. They began the short walk toward the county building, a structure of red brick with wide steps and 2 heavy doors. Cars moved steadily along the main road as the world around them carried on with its ordinary rhythm. The contrast between that normality and the turmoil in Silas's life created a strange calmness. Truth did not depend on spectacle. Truth waited quietly for someone to step forward. Inside the building, the reception desk was occupied by a woman with a neat bun and a name badge that read Darla Pierce. Her smile was polite yet professional, the kind that belonged to someone who handled difficult conversations with measured patience. "What can I help you with today?" she asked. "I need to speak with someone in elder services," Silas replied. "I have documents concerning the sale of my house." Darla guided them through a short corridor toward a waiting area furnished with soft chairs and a bulletin board filled with community announcements. A poster about financial safeguarding for seniors hung near the door, its bold letters stating that exploitation could take many forms. Silas read the lines slowly, feeling the weight of each one. A few minutes later, a case officer appeared. Her name was Rebecca Dunn, a woman in her early 40s with a calm expression and a notebook tucked under her arm. She invited them into her office, a modest room with shelves of thick folders and a single pot plant leaning toward the window. Rebecca gestured for them to sit. "I understand you have concerns about a property transaction," she said. "Please tell me what happened in your own words." Silas opened the folder and placed the papers on her desk. "My daughter brought me these forms 2 years ago. She said they were to simplify hospital paperwork. I signed them because I trusted her. My house was transferred into her name shortly after, then sold. I did not make that choice knowingly." Rebecca reviewed the documents carefully. Her eyes paused at the cognitive assessment that showed his mental capacity had been intact. She tapped the page lightly with her pen. "This assessment contradicts the explanation commonly provided in these situations. There is no medical recommendation here that suggests you required full guardianship or complete financial control by another party." Hartley leaned forward slightly. "He repaired my front gate during a storm 2 years ago," he said. "He has been capable of managing tasks and decisions. Many people in town can confirm that." Rebecca nodded. "I will need to record your statement formally. I also intend to request any additional medical records. Financial exploitation investigations follow a structured process. We examine the timeline, communication patterns, and potential conflict of interest." Silas listened without interrupting. The clarity of her explanation steadied him further. He felt seen in a way he had not felt since the confusion began. Someone was willing to consider that his version of events held weight. Rebecca continued, "If the transfer occurred without informed consent, legal remedies may be available. Some cases result in civil claims or reversal proceedings. The property sale complicates matters because it involves a third party, yet the original transfer is the foundation. That is where we begin." Silas breathed out slowly. "I do not want retribution. I want honesty restored." "That is a reasonable goal," Rebecca replied. A brief silence filled the room before she asked another question. "Has your daughter contacted you recently about the house or your stay at Maple Crest?" Silas hesitated. "She left me at a restaurant 2 nights ago and insisted that the retirement community is my home now. She said I was becoming confused. She said selling the house was necessary." Rebecca wrote something in her notebook and folded her hands. "Pressure can sometimes mask itself as concern. We will take appropriate steps." The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Figures, dates, and context were recorded with deliberate precision. Rebecca concluded by saying she would contact him within a week with initial findings. As they left the building, Hartley exhaled sharply. "You did well, Merrick. This is the beginning of something clearer." Silas adjusted the satchel strap. "I feel as though a fog has lifted. I am not sure where the path leads, though at least I can see the stones beneath my feet." They walked back through town, stopping near the small community green where children played under the watchful eyes of teachers. A row of houses bordered the field, including several recently purchased by the same investment company that bought Silas's home. Workers stood on ladders repainting trim and replacing shutters. Silas watched the activity with a quiet ache. Hartley followed his gaze. "Those houses do not feel like part of Maple Glen anymore. Investors do not see the stories inside them." "Stories are what make a place a home," Silas replied. A memory drifted toward him from years earlier. Lila at 13, running down Willow Lane with her school bag bumping against her back, calling out that she had been accepted into the science club. She rushed into the house and hugged him tightly, thanking him for checking her project late into the night. Her ambition had once been bright and full of promise. He wondered when practicality hardened her into someone capable of choices that ignored the foundation he had given her. As he and Hartley parted ways, Silas returned to Maple Crest. Jordan met him near the entrance, relief visible across his face. "Did it go all right?" Jordan asked. "It went truthfully," Silas replied. Jordan nodded. That is usually enough. Later that afternoon, a small moment unfolded in the common room that carried unexpected significance. A group of residents gathered around the television where a town council meeting was being streamed. A discussion emerged about rising property acquisition on Willow Lane. Several houses had been purchased below value, and concerns were raised about the speed of the transactions. One counselor stated that residents felt pressured into selling. Another mentioned that longtime neighbors were leaving under unclear circumstances. Silas listened with deepening understanding. His situation was not an isolated event. The pattern extended across the community. He felt a faint pulse of resolve inside his chest. The betrayal he experienced had roots connected to larger motives. His daughter had not acted alone in isolation. She had become entangled in something broader, perhaps without understanding its full consequences. The thought softened his anger. Misjudgment did not excuse harm, yet context could explain how good intentions bent under external pressures. As the meeting continued, a counselor mentioned the name of the investment company. Silas recognized it instantly from the property record pages. A representative from the company had been invited to a future meeting to address community concerns. Hartley would likely attend. Many neighbors would attend too. The truth was gradually shifting from a private ache to a matter of public interest. Evening settled over Maple Crest. Silas sat again before the empty chair, though the chair no longer felt empty. It felt like a place of preparation. The worn jacket hanging across it looked almost purposeful, as if waiting for the next step. He opened the satchel and took out his notebook. A new entry formed beneath the previous notes. County office visit completed. Investigation pending. Community concerns rising. Protect dignity. Protect truth. He added one final line. Patience is not weakness. Patience is strength held steady. As he closed the notebook, the emotional shift that ended the day was subtle yet unmistakable. The path forward no longer felt tangled. A structure was forming around him. Supporters were gathering in small, quiet ways. Silas did not yet know what would come next, though he sensed that the story Lila believed she controlled was beginning to develop fractures. The chapter closed with a quiet question that lingered in his thoughts. If truth was now moving toward the surface, how long could the narrative built around his supposed confusion continue before someone confronted Lila with the reality she never expected to face? A breeze passed through the courtyard of Maple Crest as Silas stepped outside the following Thursday evening. The sun had dipped low, coloring the sky above Maple Glen in muted rose tones. He wore the same jacket Ruth had given him decades earlier, its familiar weight grounding him. Jordan waited near the gate, ready to escort him to the community hall where the town council meeting would be held. Residents streamed down the pavement in small groups. Their voices carried fragments of conversation about rising rent prices, new developments, and concerns over longtime neighbors who had been displaced. Silas walked steadily among them, unnoticed at first, until Marianne Keller caught sight of him and waved with warm familiarity. "Good to see you out, Silas," she said, falling into step beside him. "There is quite a crowd tonight. People are worried about what is happening on Willow Lane." "I have been worried as well," he replied quietly. Marianne studied him, and understanding flickered across her expression. "I thought your move seemed sudden. Something about it never felt right." Jordan walked ahead to hold the door open as the crowd filed into the community hall. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee from a small refreshment table in the corner. Chairs had been arranged in long rows, and a handheld microphone rested on the council table. The hall filled quickly as residents took their seats, some carrying notebooks, others whispering anxiously. Silas and Marianne found chairs near the center. Hartley arrived moments later and sat on Silas's other side. His presence strengthened Silas's calmness, though an undercurrent of tension lingered beneath the surface. Soon the council chairwoman, a woman named Judith Rowe, stood and called the meeting to order. Her voice carried across the hall with practiced clarity. Tonight's agenda focuses on the recent sale of properties along Willow Lane and concerns raised by several residents. We have invited a representative from the property investment company involved. We also welcome any statements from affected individuals. The representative, a man named Daniel Orr, stepped forward in a polished suit and offered a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. His gestures were smooth, his tone confident. He spoke of development opportunities, and improved rental infrastructure in the area. He insisted that the company operated with transparency and claimed that all purchases were voluntary and mutually beneficial. Murmurs rippled through the room. Marianne whispered under her breath, "Voluntary, he says. Tell that to Mrs. Harrow, who left in tears last month." Judith raised her hand for quiet before inviting residents to speak. Several stood to voice their concerns. A widower described feeling pressured into selling when the company representatives warned of rising repair costs. A young couple said their rent had doubled after their landlord sold the property. A retired teacher explained that she had been approached repeatedly until she felt cornered. The stories formed a steady rhythm of unease, each testimony revealing a pattern. Judith then asked, "Is there anyone directly affected by a transfer of property who wishes to speak?" Hartley glanced at Silas, offering a silent question. Silas inhaled slowly, then rose with deliberate composure. A hush fell across the hall as he walked to the front. Daniel Orr watched him with an expression that suggested he had not expected an elderly man to challenge the narrative. Silas adjusted the microphone slightly. "My name is Silas Merrick," he began. His voice held the quiet steadiness of someone who had spent decades speaking only when necessary. "I lived on Willow Lane for more than 40 years. My house was sold earlier this year. The transfer did not occur with my informed consent." A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall. Silas opened his satchel and withdrew a thin folder. "These documents show a power of attorney form that I signed without full explanation. No medical authority declared me incapable of making decisions at that time. My house was transferred into another name and sold soon after for a price below its value." Judith looked intently at the papers he set on the table. "Mr. Merrick," she asked, "are you stating that you did not knowingly authorize the sale of your home?" "That is correct," he replied. Daniel Orr shifted in his seat. A faint crease formed along his forehead. Silas continued, "The company purchased the house from the person who took control of the property. Perhaps your organization believed everything was legitimate. Perhaps not. Yet the result remains. A resident of this town lost his home without understanding that such a loss was being arranged." Hartley rose from his seat and stepped forward. "I have known this man for decades," he declared. "He is not confused. He did not choose to leave Willow Lane." More murmurs followed. Some residents turned to each other, whispering names and questions. Judith raised her hand again. Her expression had shifted from formal neutrality to deep concern. "Mr. Orr," she said, "can you comment on this?" The representative cleared his throat. "Our company relies on proper documentation. If the paperwork was signed, we proceed. We cannot be held responsible for private family misunderstandings." Judith's eyes narrowed slightly. "This goes beyond a family misunderstanding." Or attempted to impose a calm expression, yet his composure faltered. A sheen of tension settled across his features as he realized the meeting had taken a direction he had not anticipated. Silas closed the folder gently. "I am not here for conflict," he said. "I am here for clarity. The home I built with my wife and raised my daughter in has become part of a transaction I barely understood. I want the truth recognized. I want fairness restored for the lane and for anyone else who faced similar pressure." A long silence followed. The room felt suspended in a moment of collective reflection. Judith finally spoke. "This matter requires formal review. The council will request an independent inquiry into the series of transfers on Willow Lane. We will examine whether any coercion or inequitable practices occurred. Mr. Merrick, thank you for bringing this forward." Applause rose slowly, hesitant at first, then gathering strength. Silas inclined his head modestly. Applause did not soothe the ache of betrayal, yet it confirmed that he had taken a step toward restoring his dignity. As he returned to his seat, Marianne leaned toward him. "You spoke with strength," she whispered. "People believe you. This will not be ignored." Jordan, who had stood near the back, met his gaze with quiet admiration. The meeting continued with procedural notes and community updates, though the previous tension lingered like an unresolved chord. When the crowd eventually began to disperse, several residents approached Silas to thank him for speaking. One elderly man said, "You gave a voice to those who felt intimidated." Another added, "You reminded us of what fairness means." When Silas and Hartley stepped outside, night had fallen fully. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. A car parked near the curb caught Silas's attention. He recognized it instantly. It was Lila's. The driver's door opened, and she stepped out slowly. Her face carried a tightness he had not seen before. She walked toward him, hesitating with each step. "Dad," she said, her voice thin. "I heard someone from the council called me. They said you raised concerns publicly. Why did you do that without talking to me?" Silas studied her carefully. The tension in her posture, the defensive tone, and the avoidance in her gaze revealed more than her words did. She had grown accustomed to controlling the narrative. The truth surfacing in public unsettled her. He answered with calm restraint. "I needed to understand what happened to my home. I needed facts, not reassurances." Her eyes flashed with brief frustration, then softened as though she were searching for the right angle to reclaim control. "You are misremembering things. I only tried to help. I handled everything because you were struggling." "I was struggling with grief," he replied. "Not incapacity." A flicker of guilt crossed her face, though it vanished quickly behind a veil of irritation. "This could cause problems," she muttered. Hartley stepped closer, his presence silent yet steady. Silas held Lila's gaze. The truth often causes problems when it has been hidden. Lila opened her mouth as if to argue, but something in her father's expression stopped her. She stepped back, the conflict visible in her eyes. She returned to her car without another word, pulling away with a speed that suggested the ground beneath her feet was beginning to shift. Silas turned to Hartley with a measured breath. "Her reaction tells me more than her explanation ever could." Hartley nodded. "The story she built is beginning to crumble." Later that night at Maple Crest, Silas wrote a single new line in his notebook. "The truth has left the shadows." The emotional shift that closed the evening carried a solemn certainty. Whatever came next would reveal who stood for integrity and who clung to deception. The lingering question rose quietly in his mind as he prepared for sleep. If Lila feared the truth being spoken aloud, what would unfold when the county investigation began uncovering details she never intended anyone to see? A pale gray morning settled over Maple Crest when Silas woke with the slow certainty that something in the air had changed. The hall outside his room carried the usual clatter of breakfast trolleys, yet a different energy touched the edges of the routine. Staff moved with a kind of cautious helpfulness that suggested news had traveled faster than expected after the community meeting. Jordan appeared at his door not long after Silas had folded his blankets. "Someone from the county office called," he said quietly. "She asked whether you would be in all day. I think they are moving quickly." Silas nodded, steadying himself with his walking stick. "I am ready for whatever they need." The worn jacket hung from the back of the empty chair, just as it always did. Silas slid the satchel strap over his shoulder, touching the frayed embroidery stitched by Ruth's careful hands. It felt like a reminder of the promises he once made to his family and the integrity he continued to guard. Shortly after midday, Rebecca Dunn arrived. She carried a folder that appeared heavier than the one Silas had given her. She greeted him with professional composure, though a quiet respect shaped her voice. "I have initial findings," she said. "May I sit?" Silas gestured toward the chair opposite him. The jacket between them created a symbolic divide, as though Ruth herself stood watch. Rebecca opened the folder. "The medical records we requested show no recommendation for guardianship. The assessment confirms that your capacity for decision-making remained intact during the period the property transfer occurred." Silas felt the confirmation settle through him. It did not feel like victory. It felt like truth coming home. Rebecca continued. A second concern emerged. The power of attorney document contains an unexplained revision. A clause was inserted between the time you signed the form and the time it was filed. The handwriting on that clause does not match yours. Silas leaned forward slightly. "Someone added text after I signed?" "That is what our specialist believes," Rebecca replied. "We will need a formal handwriting verification, though the initial signs are clear." A silence spread between them. Even the faint hum of the corridor seemed to pause. She reached for another page. "There is also evidence that the sale of the house occurred during a period in which you withdrew no funds for moving expenses. Usually, residents relocating to retirement housing engage in small financial activities. Your statements show none. This supports your claim that you did not prepare to leave your home voluntarily." "The company insisted the purchase was routine," Silas murmured. "They may not have known the full circumstances," Rebecca said. "Yet the transfer preceding the sale appears deeply irregular." She closed the folder gently, as though the weight of truth required careful handling. The next step involves interviewing your daughter. She has been notified. She is expected to respond within 3 days. A faint ache formed in Silas's chest. He felt no anger, only a weary sadness that settled like dust on an old floor. She will not welcome that discussion, he said. Defensiveness is common, Rebecca replied. What matters is the documented truth. Emotion can sway a moment, but records hold steady. Jordan stood at the doorway, keeping a respectful distance. Something in his expression revealed quiet pride. Silas offered him a small nod before turning back to Rebecca. Thank you, he said. I only wanted clarity. You have taken a difficult step with dignity, she replied. Not everyone has the strength to confront something like this. Silas watched her leave. The sunlight reached across the floor toward the empty chair, illuminating the jacket. The light made the worn fabric appear almost golden, as if carrying a memory that refused to dim. Later that afternoon, he walked through the gardens, moving at a slow pace that allowed his thoughts to settle. Tulips brightened the edge of the path. Their colors reminded him of the small garden Ruth once tended behind the house. He imagined her kneeling between rows of flowers, humming under her breath, while Lila toddled nearby, clutching a wooden spoon she used as a pretend trowel. A memory drifted forward. Lila at 5, sitting on the back steps with her knees scraped from falling on gravel. Silas had lifted her gently and carried her inside. She cried against his shoulder until Ruth dabbed her knees clean. Lila then whispered, I did not want to fall. It just happened. Her small voice trembled between guilt and fear. Silas held her close and said, Falling does not mean you meant harm. Falling means you need help getting up. The memory softened his frustration now. Perhaps Lila had not set out to betray him. Perhaps pressure from Connor, money concerns, or promises from investors had clouded her judgment. Missteps could turn into misdeeds when someone felt trapped. The question that mattered was not whether she had stumbled. It was whether she would stand up again with truth rather than denial. As he rounded the garden path, Marianne approached carrying a basket of library books. I heard the county office moved quickly, she said. People are talking. Many wondered whether someone would speak out first. Silas offered a small, tired smile. My voice is only one. Sometimes one is all that is needed, she replied. Others follow once they realize they are not alone. Her words lingered after she left. They reminded him of the fence he repaired every spring. Fixing one plank rarely saved the whole structure. Fixing the first plank always encouraged him to repair the next. As evening approached, the phone at Maple Crest reception rang. Jordan appeared again at Silas's doorway. His expression revealed nothing at first, though the way he held the phone suggested the conversation had been difficult. It was your daughter, he said quietly. She asked whether she could visit. Silas closed his notebook gently. I expected she would. Jordan hesitated. Are you ready for that conversation? There is no preparation for heartbreak, Silas replied. There is only honesty. The meeting was arranged for early evening. The sky outside had deepened to a muted blue when Lila arrived. She paused at the threshold of the garden, clutching her handbag tightly. The defensive glare of the previous evening had softened into something more fragile, though uncertainty still lined her posture. She approached slowly. Dad, she said, voice trembling slightly. Can we talk? Silas nodded. They sat together on a bench facing the garden. A single cracked paving stone lay beneath their feet, a reminder that even quiet places contained imperfections. Lila folded her hands tightly. The county office contacted me, she began. They said there are concerns about the property transfer. They said documents might be reviewed. Silas remained silent, allowing her to continue. She exhaled shakily. I only wanted to protect you. I thought you were slipping. I thought you needed help. Connor said the market would crash. He said we needed to act before we were overwhelmed. Silas kept his voice calm. Did you ask me? Did you trust me to decide? Her eyes glistened. I thought if I told you, you would refuse. I thought you would cling to the house. I thought you would put yourself at risk. Risk does not come from age, Silas replied. Risk comes from secrecy. Lila looked down at her hands. A faint tremor ran through them. I did not mean to hurt you. I did not realize how far it had gone until it was done. Intent does not erase consequence, he said gently. Tears slipped down her cheeks, though she quickly wiped them away. I do not know how to fix this, she whispered. That is not for me to decide, Silas replied. Your choices will speak for themselves. She looked at him with uncertainty. torn between fear and remorse. The investigation will make everything public. Truth often does, Silas replied. A long silence settled between them. Lila rose slowly, as though unsure whether she had been dismissed or spared. She took a step backward, unable to hold his gaze. "I am sorry," she whispered. The words reached him, though remorse without action seemed hollow. He watched her walk away, holding the strap of her handbag as if it anchored her. He remained on the bench long after she left. The sky darkened, and the first stars appeared faintly above the horizon. He finally returned to his room and wrote a final note for the day. She feels the consequences. She does not yet face them. Truth must finish what it has begun. The emotional shift closing the chapter carried a profound stillness. Support had gathered around him. Evidence had surfaced and moral clarity had returned. The question that lingered was simple yet powerful. When the final truth emerged, would Lila choose accountability or allow the weight of her decisions to reshape her life in ways she never intended? A soft rain traced silver patterns across the windows of the county building on the morning of the hearing. The sky above Maple Glen carried a muted stillness, as though the town itself paused in anticipation. Silas arrived early, guided by Jordan, who walked beside him with the quiet steadiness of someone who understood the gravity of the moment. The worn jacket rested across Silas's shoulders, its familiar weight settling him as he stepped through the glass doors. Several residents from Willow Lane waited in the lobby. Marianne approached first, her expression warm yet resolute. "You are not alone today," she said. "People know what you have endured." Silas nodded quietly, not as a gesture of pride, but as an acknowledgement of shared struggle. Hartley soon joined them, carrying a notebook and the same unwavering presence he offered from the start. The three of them formed a modest circle of solidarity in a building filled with official gravity. Rebecca Dunn appeared at the entrance to the hearing room and motioned for them to enter. A long table stood at the center, with three officials seated behind it. A recording device rested between them. Chairs lined the opposite side, one for each participant. Silas took the central seat with slow precision. Lila arrived moments later, stepping into the room with a hesitant expression. She held a folder tightly against her chest. Connor followed her, though he lingered near the door rather than taking a seat. His posture betrayed unease, as though he sensed the ground beneath their decisions had begun to crumble. The hearing officer began with a calm explanation of the purpose of the meeting. "We are examining the transfer and subsequent sale of the property on Willow Lane, along with the circumstances under which decision-making authority was granted. Each party will have the opportunity to speak." Rebecca presented the documents first. She placed each page on the table, explaining the discrepancies with measured clarity. The altered clause in the power of attorney form drew particular attention. The handwriting analysis indicated a mismatch significant enough to raise concern. A copy of the medical assessment confirmed that Silas had retained decision-making capacity at the time. The officer turned to Silas. "Mr. Merrick, do you wish to make a statement?" Silas folded his hands on the table. "I trusted my daughter with every part of my life. I believed the documents she gave me were meant to help with hospital matters. I had no understanding that my home would be transferred or that a sale was imminent. I discovered the truth only recently." His voice held no anger, only the steady clarity of someone who had reclaimed his footing. The officer then looked toward Lila. Her breath caught slightly as she prepared to speak. "I did not intend harm," she said. "I thought my father was struggling. I thought the market would collapse. I thought selling the house would protect us. It became more complicated than I expected." The officer asked, "Did you inform your father of the transfer and sale?" Lila hesitated. "I tried to. He seemed overwhelmed. I believed handling things for him was safer." "How was the revised clause added?" Her fingers tightened around her folder. "Connor said it was standard. He said the form needed clarification. I assumed it was allowed." The officer turned to Connor. "Mr. Hale, do you wish to respond?" Connor maintained a polished expression. "I believed I was helping them both. The market was changing quickly. I thought it was the sensible choice to secure the sale." Hartley stepped forward when invited. "Silas was never incapable of making decisions," he said. "He managed his affairs, repaired houses, supported neighbors, and lived independently. No one who knew him doubted his clarity." Marianne added her own statement, describing the suddenness of the move, the lack of packing activity, and the absence of preparation. Her testimony supported the broader pattern of concern on Willow Lane. The hearing officer reviewed the points made. A long pause followed as she examined the folder once more. The quiet in the room carried a tension that felt almost tangible. She finally spoke. The evidence indicates that Mr. Merrick did not provide informed consent for the transfer. The revision inserted into the document raises serious ethical concerns. While the sale to the investment company cannot be reversed through this process, the transfer preceding it may be declared invalid. Control of the power of attorney will be suspended. Financial review procedures will begin. Further legal recommendations will be made separately. A breath moved through the room, subtle yet unmistakable. The decision did not punish with severity. It corrected with integrity. Lila bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. The weight of her choices settled visibly upon her. She whispered, "Dad, I never meant for this to happen. I thought I was helping. I did not see the harm." Silas looked at her, his eyes soft yet unyielding. "You forgot that trust comes with responsibility. You forgot that guidance must never replace honesty." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with the quiet recognition of consequences she could no longer outrun. Connor stepped toward her, though she moved away slightly, as though realizing his influence had shaped far more than she once admitted. Rebecca closed her folder gently. "Mr. Merrick," she said, turning to him, "you may now request an independent advocate to manage your affairs if you wish. You have the right to choose someone you trust." Silas nodded. "I will consider that." As the hearing ended, residents offered him small gestures of support. A pat on the shoulder, a nod, a quiet word. Their presence felt like the rebuilding of a fence that had once leaned precariously. Lila remained seated long after others had left. When she finally approached Silas outside the building, her steps were slow and uncertain. "I know I cannot undo this," she whispered. "I am frightened of what comes next." Silas looked at the sky, where the rain had thinned to a soft mist. "Growth comes after truth," he said gently. "You must choose what to do with that truth." She lowered her gaze. "I will try. Trying is the first step," he replied. Jordan guided Silas back toward Maple Crest. The pavement gleamed with rainwater, reflecting the streetlights in soft, wavering patterns. Silas walked with a steady rhythm, the weight of the jacket soothing rather than burdening him. When he reached his room, he placed the satchel on the table. The empty chair remained where it always sat, facing him with quiet patience. He draped the jacket across its back and allowed himself a slow breath. He opened his notebook and wrote the final entry. "Dignity returns when truth is allowed its place." The room felt still, almost sacred. The weight of betrayal had lessened, replaced by a calm acceptance that came not from triumph, but from understanding. A single sentence lingered in his thoughts as he closed the book, settling over him like the last line of a long, quiet film. Every life contains storms, yet strength is found in the way a person chooses to stand when the clouds finally part.